my grandma called me because she's like, I'm going to buy you a shirt for your birthday. And I'm like, oh, okay. The best part of it is that like she does the grandma thing where she calls me and she's telling me about these shorts and these shirts. And I'm like, well, grandma, you have an iPhone. I can FaceTime you. And then she goes, oh, okay. Immediate shot to just. So I have this shirt and
So let me see the shirt, Grandma.
I'm like, Grandma, let me see the shirt. And she's like, okay, I have it right here. It's just like her arm.
Oh, Grandma.
Yeah, I love her though.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a cinematic odyssey through the 100 greatest films spanning from the roaring 1920s to the cutting-edge masterpieces of 2024. Carefully curated from the lovely people on Letterboxd. Two intrepid souls embark on a journey through a treasure trove of timeless classics and groundbreaking contemporary works, where each frame embodies the enduring magic of the silver screen. Grab your popcorn and join us on this epic expedition through a century of cinematic excellence, where every film promises to enchant, inspire, and leave an indelible mark on the soul. And now, for your listening pleasure, here are the LetterBros.
Well, there.
Welcome back, everybody, to LetterBros, where we watch the 100 best movies and let a wheel decide what we watch next. As always, I am Felix. I'm joined by my friend Parker. How we doing today, buddy?
A little bit depressed.
Yeah. This is something else. If you didn't listen to the last episode, we spun the wheel and we were left with Igmar Bergman's film Scenes from a Marriage, which is our second movie about divorce.
And our second Ingmar Bergman film.
And our second almost 3-hour Ingmar Bergman movie.
Yeah.
We want to just jump right into it. Parker will give us a synopsis and we'll go further into our thoughts about this movie. But I mean, just right off the bat, like,
and I'm joking, by the way. I'm doing swell. Thank you so much for asking.
Yes, no, Parker is doing very well. No, we're
yes.
all okay. I did have to watch a movie after this just to like get the sad taste out of my mouth.
So, but yeah, Scenes from a Marriage, as we stated, is directed by Ingmar Bergman, was made in 1973, and it was also a miniseries, a Swedish miniseries that ran its course over 6 episodes. And what you and I watched, Felix, is the condensed version of that, runtime at about 2 hours and 50 minutes. Again, a lot more left to be explored, and we definitely got a full feature-length film out of it. I felt satiated. I didn't feel as though anything was really left out. And we'll get to that, but it does star Liv Ullmann as Marianne and Erland Josephson as Johan. The series originally aired on Swedish television, was later edited into the feature film, and it follows these two, Marianne and Johan, we start with them after 10 years of marriage, and we follow them for the next 10 years as they go through a divorce. They find some things out about each other, and they explore their own personal lives outside of wedlock and how their relationship continues to grow and mature over that period of time and the difficulties that they face during that maturation process. We're going to dive into it. It is broken up into separate episodes, even in the feature-length film, which makes sense, of course, because it was a miniseries. So there are title cards throughout the film. And I don't know about you, but I think it might be best to dissect this film moving section by section. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I agree. We can do it like that because again, it honestly helped so much for the watching experience of this film.
I think this is one of the best uses. And again, obviously, it was a mini series, but the title cards are the best title cards.
Yeah, but
they really work for the film.
Even in Fanny and Alexander, that was also supposed to be meant for TV, but there weren't like those breaks. Like the movie just kind of kept going. It just like kind of matched all the episodes.
Did Fanny and Alexander not have title cards?
No, it didn't. I don't think so. I don't remember there being title cards.
You're gonna have to ABC fact check you real quick. Yeah, so it looks like there's one that says first act, and then the Ekdahl family celebrates Christmas. The Google AI overview says there isn't much information about whether Fanny and Alexander has title cards.
So Go watch it again, Parker.
But besides the point, I still need to dive into the full length.
What I will say is, like, before we dive into like just breaking it down like episodically, obviously, like, this is our second Ingmar Bergman film. This is also our second of his films that was adapted from the television and condensed into a 3-hour movie. I feel like this one worked a lot better as a movie than what Fanny and Alexander was.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. I think that Fanny and Alexander, you did feel as though there was a lot more to be explored, at least in my mind.
Absolutely.
And still,
like
this one, I could guarantee that a full-length watch of this would be satisfying and would inform the viewer more, but it definitely worked. I agree with you. It definitely worked better as a feature film than Fanny and Alexander did.
Like it just made more sense, like just story wise. Like obviously, like there's things that we don't dive into a lot deeper, but just finding out about it, like there's not really. I didn't feel like I needed to know more about the surprises in the film. I just kind of accepted them for what they were and just, kept the movie going. So,
and I do want to add to that comparison while we're on the topic, but I mean, wow, what a difference between the two movies when you think about it, because Fanny and Alexander, how many characters were in that film? A lot.
Correct.
And this one, we literally, we practically only see Marianne and Johann in this film. They have 2 daughters, and we literally only see them in the very first shot.
Literally.
And
one of them, I think,
it's their daughters. It's crazy. But what were you saying?
No, I was going to say that one of those daughters is played by Bergman's actual daughter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have to.
I wonder though why you're looking into that. I do wonder if that helps it in the sense that there was so much more to be explored in Fanny and Alexander, because you have this sprawling family, each member of which has their own unique story and outlook on life and interesting character dynamic. I remember we were talking about how each character in Fanny and Alexander interacted differently with every other character, and how their relationships came through the screen in a very entertaining manner. This one, the 2 leads have to carry the entire runtime, and they do. And I think that may help with it working as a feature film, because we're just following these 2 characters.
Yeah, it's a lot more easy to follow than Fanny and Alexander, where we were introduced to so many characters, and at least the feature-length version introduced characters and problems with those characters and just completely scrapped them to move on to something else. So, but I'm liked that we had just these 2 characters, and it just gave them the opportunity to absolutely like just kill scenes and see those developments, because we were only concentrated on these 2 people. But yes, Lena Bergman, or Lena Bergman, Bergman's first daughter, played Karen. I don't know which one it is because it doesn't, but I mean, thought it was a really cool fact. But yeah, if you want, let's just dive right into it and just look at these scenes from a marriage.
Yeah, so the first title card that we jump into is Innocence and Panic. We see Marianne and Johann sitting down for an interview that informs us as the audience of how perfect, so to speak, of a marriage that they have. A magazine is publishing an article about them as this picture perfect couple. And it's an entertaining scene that allows us to get a little bit of backstory into the characters' personalities. And then we jump to Marianne and Johann in their home with their friends, Paul and Katarina was her name, I believe. And essentially we see that this couple is quite
Peter
the opposite.
And Katarina.
Thank you. They're quite the opposite of what we are expecting Johann and Marianne to be. They are aggressively going at it, fighting-wise, with each other. He's getting drunk, she's getting annoyed, and it shows us the dichotomy between the 2 couples right off the bat. I thought this first act was a great hook into where this was going to go. I thought it laid the groundwork of the couple that we're going to follow well. And we'll get into it kind of in the second act, but you obviously know something's going to go wrong with Marianne and Johann, right?
Oh yeah, because I mean, the movie wouldn't be it itself without it. I mean, it's which also that whole like dinner party between the 4 of them just screamed the dinner party from The Office. Just like you're watching this other couple just like go absolutely batshit crazy. And you're just left there just watching this, like watching a car crash unfold. It was so uncomfortable to watch, but it
And I
made
think
for
that upon it, I really do think, not to get too ahead of ourselves, it'll be interesting to watch the beginning. I really want to stress the beginning, maybe the first half of this film again, knowing what we find out going forward in terms of how Johann comforts, what was his name again?
Peter.
Peter, thank you. As Johann comforts Peter, who's kind of being an asshole in this situation. And
Oh yeah,
so,
it's just like, oh, you know what it feels like living in hell, like in front of his wife. You know, they're going off about their divorce in front of this other couple, and like how he's refusing to split assets, and like
mhm.
it's so uncomfortable.
And here we should also mention that Marianne is a divorce lawyer, and Johann
Yes.
is a scientist. So that also
Mhm.
adds an interesting dynamic. We'll get into that in the next title card when we see a little bit more about Marianne's job. But
Mhm.
yeah, I liked this first act. I think it laid the groundwork well.
It did, and it really set up like just what we're supposed to think of Marianne and Johann. Because I mean, you see the first couple, and you're like, oh, it can't possibly get worse than that. Like they're not going to get to that level. Because I mean, they go back home and they're talking about like how crazy that party was. And I mean, like from what we see, they're very loving, they're very affectionate, like they're just going through it. They don't seem to have like any like issues presented to the audience. Like to us, it just seems like a normal, just pretty well balanced couple. So you're left with, okay, like this is really nice. But then obviously, like as we go through the film, it like almost kind of either equally gets to that level or it just gets a little bit worse. But we'll dive more into that as we
In
go
a
through.
different way. And I will say that Peter and Katarina's relationship, even as we watched it deteriorate in front of our eyes, was very immature. And I think that there are immature things that are done later down the line by our main characters. I hesitate to call either of them protagonists. However,
Uh, I
they
got some choice words for that.
but they remain mature in the way that they speak to each other for the most part. There are some scenes in which some unacceptable things happen, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But in the way that they speak to each other, even when addressing issues, they have a more mature verbiage and a
Yeah,
more
like they're
mature
not
tone of voice. They're not name calling. For the most part, they're not
in the
name
beginning of the
calling. Yeah,
movie, they're not.
correct.
There
Um,
are a couple lines that I did want to bring up that I thought like that stood out to me, not only
yeah,
because they were in subtitles, but they hit really. It's just they were writing their ass off in this movie.
yeah,
One of them, I think
yeah.
it's spoken by Peter. And this is like in the big scene where they're all sitting at the coffee table, like drinking. And he says, "Is there anything more terrifying than a husband and a wife who hate each other?"
hmm
Which I thought that's just, obviously it's like what we see later on that like you see this loving couple, like seemingly loving, but the terrifying thought of it is that they're continuing to go through this relationship, but they secretly just hate each other's guts and they're just continuing to live through life just for the sake of whether it's like, they want to stick together because they have the children or they have other underlying things wanting to keep this marriage complete, but they hate each other, and that's just like a terrible way and a terrifying way to live life. There was also one that I thought was really funny, like when they're back home, and they're washing dishes, and Marianne asks Johann, "Do you think our marriage can last an eternity?" And he brings up a very stupid but kind of clever idea of he thinks that a marriage should be a 5-year contract with a renewal at the end of those 5 years. He
hmm
says that that would be more feasible.
But he also says it very casually. And Marianne also mentions, do you ever think about sleeping with other people? And she kind of hints that she sometimes does. So we get a little bit of foreshadowing. And this is where I think I'll just flat out say it up until we get to Paula, the act of Paula, which
Oh boy.
we'll talk about that. I thought that Marianne was going to be the one that strays off from this relationship
Hmm.
and begins to realize that she wants to explore other areas of life.
Which
And we'll get into
I
whether or
didn't
not
really
that was the
get that
case.
at the
But
beginning, because even in, like, the interview scene, like, I wrote it down here because I was just like, this is their character trait for the whole movie, I guess, is that we see that Johann is very outspoken. Like, they literally ask each other, "Talk about yourself and your accomplishments," and Johann just goes on and on and on. He's very boastful about his accomplishments and what he has done in his work, in his life, and Marianne's answer is just very cut, very dry. Like, just she says what her job is and doesn't really go further into that. So, but I thought from the very beginning that Johann was going to be the one to kind of put a levy in this marriage and kind of break this off, or have like the
Hmm.
turning point in this marriage that really just makes it spiral. But
Hmm.
again, we'll go further into that into the one of the later episodes. But
Yeah, you must just be a little bit more perceptive, because I don't know why. I thought that there were hints being dropped that Marianne was bored in their relationship.
oh my God, no. She's the one trying to keep everything together.
I know, and I realized that. And so that third act was a little bit of a shock to me as a viewer.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I will have to go back and rewatch the beginnings of this movie.
But I think this is a perfect segue into the
Mhm.
second episode, which I don't know if it was because I was falling asleep during the movie. I literally have one note for the second episode.
Interesting.
But it's like a throwaway one. But the second episode is called The Art of Sweeping Things Under the Rug. And in this one, this is where we sort of get a view into what each of them do. I know that Marianne obviously is a divorce lawyer. She mentions that in the interview, and we see that come into practice. Johann, I think, is practicing at, like, I think he's a university professor.
Yeah, he's a scientist of some sort studying.
Yeah, he's like he's having this lady like draw shit in the dark. Like, it was very weird. Which actually, whatever happened with that lady?
That's the only time that we see his coworker.
Because I was like, I had big vibes of like, this is gonna be the home wrecker. Like,
Right.
this is going to be the person, and they're just best friends. And then we
Right.
never see this woman ever again. I think her name is Eva.
However, I do think that her character lays the groundwork for the qualms that Johann has with himself.
Yeah.
Because he asks her about his poetry. He literally asks for an objective perspective on the poetry that he asked her to read. Should I send it to the publisher? She says, don't waste your time. It's mediocre. And that word mediocre, I think, really digs at Johann's character, because as we saw in the opening interview, his perception of himself is very high. And we also learn that in school, growing up, these two grew up together, that everyone else thought the same about Johann. Everybody thought that he was going to go on to achieve spectacular things. And here he finds himself kind of treading water in the ocean of mediocrity, and it bothers him, and you can tell. So I think both of these scenes allow us insight into our two characters moving forward.
Yeah, and they kind of both lay the groundwork for what we see early on, because then we jump into into her job, where she is sitting with an older woman, which I don't have it how long she was with her husband, but I mean,
20 years.
it's 20 years. Okay, yeah. So very long time. It's an elderly woman going through this divorce, and she is just laying in about her situation with her husband. And this is where my note comes into play, where my note just says that old woman just said, "Fuck those kids. I never loved them." Going on about just, the children that she raised with her husband and how she never truly loved them, which that was just shocking. Like, you get a lot of like movies where like the kids could be just these over the top portrayals, but we never really see parents saying that, like, I don't love my child. Like, there's faults, but I still love that child. This woman just said, I don't love my children.
Right. And she even does mention that she feels as though she has the capability to love. I thought it was a very interesting scene. I also want to know, I think this is the last act in which we see any other character other than Marianne and Johann. I'm fairly certain.
Yeah.
However,
no, literally, it is.
This woman says to Marianne, she says, I have a mental image of myself that doesn't correspond with reality. And here I was watching this conversation between this woman who is loveless in her marriage and with her children and Marianne. And I feel as though I'm watching Marianne empathize with her and kind of understand where she's coming from. And this is why I thought that we were receiving foreshadowing that, maybe Marianne is realizing she kind of feels the same way. She has a mental image of herself that doesn't match with reality, and she's bored in this relationship, and she feels as though her potential is much greater than a regular life with Johann. So this is where I was convinced this was the direction that we were going. And now to know that the opposite is true, again, I would love to rewatch the scene and see how Liv Ullmann plays this, knowing what I know now.
Yeah. I just
And
thought
having
that a
that
lot of it
context.
was, because after, like, for most of these scenes, we get a lot of shots afterwards of them at the house together drinking. These people drink their ass off in this movie, I feel like. They're drinking heavily. But it allows them, to kind of pour their feelings out and have these like deep, meaningful conversations. But I feel like a lot of the time it was just, Johann boasting and Johann just kind of either just trying to like be very like he wants to cut the conversation short, or he wants to just like he doesn't really want to dive deeper into it, but Marianne is always the one like wanting to push the conversation forward and wanting to try and keep this dialogue going. Like they're even talking about just like a lot of the bigger themes about like the wedge in their marriage is about sexual attraction.
Right, which brings us
So
to the end of this segment of the movie where
yeah,
they are
which
having
they
that discussion.
correct, that they talk about like, do you still find me sexually attractive? And, he doesn't really like go out and just say no, but a lot of his answers scream no.
And so
Um,
and so to hers though, they both seem as though they're very bored with their sexual life. They don't find any fire in it anymore. I
yeah, but
feel
I
as though
feel
they
a
both
lot of
make
it
it.
is that like maybe she doesn't, but she wants to try and find
Mhm,
something to spark it. Whereas Johan is just like, I don't, and I don't want to try and find anything.
mhm.
I'm just gonna keep going with how I feel, and I don't want to fix it at all. Like
But he
that,
also to me, it read as though he also feels inadequate. He feels as though he knows that she doesn't receive pleasure from it anymore, so he feels inadequate, and it almost as though that endeavor is a pointless one because he can never please her. So that is also a topic of or a subtopic of this discussion that they're having.
this is very interesting because I
It
feel
is. I mean, it's a
this is
great analysis on. I
no,
I
I
thought
because
it was
I
very
feel
well done.
like
Yeah.
this is probably the first time where we have like watched a movie and have had almost completely opposite viewing experiences. Because again, I thought the movie was just screaming like Johann is the bad guy. Like
Hmm.
Johann, like obviously they have both of them have faults that eventually led to their split, but I felt like a lot of it was like, hey, this guy right here, this guy's a fucking asshole. This
Oh, no, no, no,
guy, yeah,
so by all means, I still did feel that way. I didn't think that either of them were you could tell very early on that neither of these characters were going to be perfect. They both have
yeah,
their flaws. However, I felt as though it would be Johann's flaws that are what inspire Marianne to explore other
yeah,
avenues. So I agree with you there. I didn't think that he's trying to shut down the conversation. He's not being communicative. You're right. He did shut down that conversation. And as we close this scene, Marianne says to him, "You can make love to me," and he just rolls over and goes to sleep. So you're
yeah,
right. She absolutely did make an effort, and they end the conversation on a positive note. They really do, despite the fact that he goes to sleep and she's left, again disappointed. They do end the conversation laughing with each other as opposed to in an argument. I do want
but
to mention before we move on to the third episode, the conversation that takes place at the beginning of The Art of Sweeping Things Under the Rug, in which Marianne wants to cancel dinner with her mom. And this is
oh
another piece of
yeah,
information that I thought was some bit of foreshadowing because she's the one that's wanting to break the routine. We later find out that Johann is the one that was severely upset with the routine of their lives. But to me, it was reading as though Marianne wanted to break this routine. She wanted to just spend the day with her husband and with her children. And she calls her mom, and it gets shut down essentially immediately her mom makes all of these excuses, and we later find out the relationship that her mother has played in both Johann's life and Marianne's life. She seems as though she's a very strict and overshadowing figure in their lives. And I thought it was a really interesting scene that again allowed us to peer into the minds of these two characters, because she gets shut down and then she goes off to wake the kids, and Johann almost calls her mom and says, "We're not coming to dinner." So that did allow you a peek into his thought process. Again, it's just so gripping. It's so interesting. These small decisions, just something so small as him almost calling her mom, allows you so much to see into their thought process and makes you think, what are they feeling? What are their actual motives here? So I thought it was just very well crafted all around.
Oh yeah. I mean,
it
leaves you something. It leaves you just a little appetizer of what is going to transpire like throughout the movie. Like it just leaves you little blips. It doesn't give you everything right there and then. Like you said, even just the subtle motion of him almost attempting to call the mom again to cancel dinner, like showing that, like, again, he wants to break the routine, but he just doesn't go through with it.
Right. And he's not quick to anger. We learned that very early on.
Yeah.
Marianne says that
it takes a lot
to anger. I'm sorry?
I said it takes a lot.
Right. Yep. And of course, it feels as though maybe he's been holding a lot of that in. We kind of find out, which is not the healthy thing to do. No. Maybe Marianne's frequent yet less severe expression of anger is the healthier thing to do mentally. Again, that's subjective. But yes, I thought this act was great in terms of continuing to lay the groundwork, the second episode, so to speak, before we really get into the emotional heavyweight scenes.
Which we do get in this third act, or in this third episode, titled Paula, where it opens up with them at, like, I guess, like, their summer home. It's not the normal house that we've been seeing before. It's kind of like a remote cabin out, like, almost in the middle of nowhere. Like, there's very few neighbors. He comes home. I'm guessing that he was on a business trip and he'd come home early.
Or coming from his actual house, maybe, is what I was seeing. Their home that they were coming from. She got out there early with the kids, maybe.
Yeah, to, like, get everything prepped. Yeah, that makes more sense. To now, like, she's very excited to see him, and he almost looks like he saw a ghost. Like, he is not, he is checked out of whatever is happening in this conversation. And this is where we find out that he has fallen in love with another woman named Paula, the title of this episode. I'm guessing it was like a colleague of his, which it was much younger. I think she was like Johann. They said it in the first episode. He's 42, and this new love interest is, I think 23.
She's 23, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously very young, much younger than Marianne, who in the interview was 35. But obviously, like, she's very upset about this. Like,
but also incredibly well-mannered and
oh yeah,
thoughtful.
She wants to try and work around this, and it's not like, I mean, any other movie we would see where there's, somebody admits to cheating, like, there's a fight. She either goes out and tries to kill the lover, she tries to kill her husband, like, but this woman who and that's why, like, this just fits so well. And I thought Marianne wasn't going to be the one to go and put a wedge in it. She wants to work around this situation to where it could still keep the marriage afloat and keep everything together. Like, she is trying to be the glue to keep this marriage together.
She immediately plays the long game. She immediately is understanding and empathetic with him.
Yeah.
And I was surprised because I even have a note. He walks in and immediately I write down, he had an affair for sure. You can immediately tell by his body language. Then I have, here we fucking go. And here I was thinking, I thought it was going to be her. It's literally written in my notes. And I have to say, this is the first movie where I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. I think I'm going to give this a 10 in acting. I mean,
Thank you, God.
This scene was two of the most incredible, on both ends, two of the most incredible performances I think I've ever watched on a screen. And it goes to show, too, you don't need to cry to be convincing in an emotional scene.
You don't need your Oscar moment, homie.
Liv Ullmann is so composed as Marianne and so well-mannered and so well-spoken and so thoughtful, and yet you can still see behind her eyes the sharp pains that are shooting through her mind and through her heart, and the sense of betrayal that she's feeling. And similarly, Erland Josephson is turning in an incredible performance as someone who's incredibly guilt-ridden, and by proxy of that guilt, lashing out in anger towards this person who he's finally letting in on this secret that he's been carrying for 4 years, remember?
Yeah.
4 years that he has been seeing this other person. Since she was 19, mind you, if we back
Yeah.
that up. So
wait, Paula. Yeah. Jesus
what a
Christ.
dump of information and a great bit of insight into who these people are and
it doesn't
who has
feel
the
like
right
we're
priorities.
like to your point, it doesn't feel like we're getting dumped on with exposition. Like it's very few just like bits of dialogue that open up this whole other fucking story going on in this movie. And it's just, it's like to your point,
The dam
I'm glad
breaks.
that
The dam breaks.
the damn fucking breaks and the floodgates are open, and they're doing this all while eating mayo and pickle sandwiches and drinking beer. Like it's played out so beautifully. Like this is where the movie and its acting prowesses like really begin after we've been like, you know, laid down the groundwork for what is going to happen. This is the jumping off point for this, and it's played out beautifully by these two. And it's just
And you're right. It feels like a genuine conversation, and it's so heartbreaking.
It's very real.
To hear Marianne ask him, "Tell me about her." I can't. It's harder for you to
show me a picture of her,
right? And it makes sense from a human level. It's so absurd in some ways, but it makes sense from a human level. She says, and she's so convincing. It is going to be harder for me to watch you fly to Paris and live there for 6 months at least with someone who I have no idea about. Like, fill that gap for me. It's like I feel even emotional talking about that scene. And and when she asks him, "Well, when will you be back?" And he lays it on her that I'm going to be gone. I'm leaving. Her whole world is falling apart right in front of her eyes. They have 2 daughters together as well. I mean, and none of it goes to really to money or anything or how they're. It is very logistical in the way that they discuss this going forward. How they're going to carry on with it.
But what I think was what the most interesting part about it is that, you know, while Johann is there, she doesn't become extremely emotional. It's not until, you know, she gets on the phone and calls like one of their like family friends to ask about this, and they apparently knew about it and didn't tell her at all. Like they knew and didn't tell her about it. And this is where, you know, she hangs up the phone angrily. She like covers herself up with a pillow and blanket to like, and I thought she was going to be screaming, but she didn't. But I mean, this is the most emotional we have seen Marianne in this movie, but she waits until Johann is gone to express that.
Which is so perfect. I mean, the way that, and Ingmar Bergman, I just want to say, is quickly becoming one of my favorite directors. Two movies in.
This movie has definitely put him up there. Like
he's got a lot of films still on this list, by the way.
Yeah,
Letterboxd loves Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah, they love the Criterion Collection, dude. Like literally, I feel like the last like 4 films we've seen have all been from the Criterion Collection and Jonas Films. They own this. They paid Letterboxd some money to be on this list, dude. But I mean, it has been valid, like especially with these Ingmar Bergman films. Like, yes, I had my reservations about Fanny and Alexander because like this definitely felt like it was a mini series that was chopped up into a movie, but this one also the same thing doesn't feel like that. Like, yes, we got these episodic titles, but you're not really left wondering what the hell is going on. I don't know if like the miniseries like has a scene where we like maybe see Paula. Like I hadn't really looked into like, what the differences were, but
and we can go ahead and air that out. You don't even see a picture of Paula in this movie.
No, like you see
I love
Marianne looking at a picture, but we never see the picture.
And I really liked that. I love the fact that we stick with these 2 characters. Dude, that's tough on writing the film. That's tough on the actors. That's tough on everything. That is a hard thing to do. And
we're like outside of like this, I mean, to your point, like once this 3rd act starts, like following the rest of the movie, like we don't really get scenes where one doesn't know what the other one is happening. A lot like the rest of this movie is them together, and we are literally watching
However,
scenes from a marriage. We are literally just
there is this movie takes place over 10 years. So there is significant time that takes place between some of these acts. And that is you are informed of that gracefully. It's not a title card that says 2 years later.
Yeah,
It
and
comes up naturally in conversation. And I want to commend the film for this too. Everything that you need to know comes up in conversation in a very, very natural way. This whole movie feels incredibly human, just like A Separation did. It just feels very human. Again, even more about the human condition in my mind than the human condition was.
No,
I mean,
literally.
if there's a movie that has screamed, this is an aspect of the human condition. One could even say these two are on opposite ends of the spectrum by the end of the movie, on the scale of the human condition, yet they still end up meeting in the middle of that massive scale that they have. So
they despite everything that's happened, they always seem to find a way to end the conversation in a loving manner. Like after this, we see and I mean, I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but we see a lot of scenes where they're being affectionate towards each other, like not even just like in terms of like having sex with each other, which they do, but it's more so of just like cuddling and just showing affection that like despite everything that's happened, I still share this affection and love for you, which again, I feel that can dive into the next episode because
yes.
I feel like I want to like just start jumping into what happens
Yeah. Let's
afterwards
move on
because
to it.
again, we have now reached the point of the levee breaking in this marriage. They haven't even talked about divorce yet. Like they haven't really spoken about like wanting to get a divorce even after finding out that he has a separate partner. But now we get into the Vale of Tears where we see, I'm guessing Johann comes back from this trip and he goes to see Marianne.
So it's been 6 months. Yes.
So it's been 6 months. Unbeknownst to Paula, which I think he says that he's going to like watch a movie, but he ends up going to see Marianne.
So this is where at first in Paula in that episode, I was heartbroken for Marianne. Then I become annoyed on behalf of her. And then moving forward, I will become frustrated at her as well as at Johann. Again, getting ahead of myself, but
I literally have in my notes, this guy is a slime ball.
he's such a freaking slime. So essentially,
He is.
the Veil of Tears, he walks in and he immediately wants to fuck her. Immediately.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he's got that drive back, and it's so disheartening to watch. He's so affectionate with her off the bat, and you can tell that he showed up there to have sex with her. That was his motive.
It was a booty call.
After 6 months, after leaving her and his 2 daughters for 6 months.
After not even giving her 6 months, after literally saying, "When are you coming back?" And he says, "I'm leaving." Like I don't have an answer to that question. They go over, they're, having some drinks, having some dinner. This is also when Marianne brings up that she's been, seeking help, seeing a psychologist, and that they've recommended to her to start writing down just anything that pops into your head and keep a journal, which he is very interested in wanting to listen to. Like he wants her to read this journal so bad.
So he says. Means to an end, though. The means being, okay, she can go get her journal so that I can sleep with her is essentially how I'm perceiving it.
To kind of just make it seem like I care to get an in.
He's feigning interest, essentially.
Which I also loved this scene of her reading her journal because it cuts to, I don't know if these are just like stock photos of just like young Swedish kids, but I mean, I think I want to say that these are all pictures of Liv Ullmann growing up because they look exactly like her. Especially like the teen photos. I feel like those are all just like old pictures of Liv Ullmann, but like as she's, pouring her heart out and like just giving this amazing monologue just about her feelings, about how she, like, we essentially get another exposition dump of her life up until this point. And in the middle of her talking about this motherfucker's asleep.
After trying, and before this, he had tried to sleep with her kind of aggressively.
Yeah.
And she lets him know. And again, just so well written and so well performed. And it pulls at your heartstrings. She tells him, I've thought about this every single day, about being with you and sleeping with you again. and I think about you multiple times a day. And sometimes I get hours that go by where I don't think about you at all," she says later, and it's pure bliss. But
Yeah.
she says essentially, "I want to lay with you. I want this to happen, but then you will just leave and I'll be even more heartbroken. I'll just be
Mhm.
alone again."
I
And
was literally thinking about, like, what is it that she said? Because that hit really hard where
Mhm.
she like, again, going into that, like, she wants to be with this she wants to be with Johann. She consistently thinks about that, and it literally brings her, like, almost physical and emotional pain just thinking
Mhm.
about it, and that even admitting that, like, "Well, yes, it brings me peace not thinking about you, and this is why I don't wanna do this, because I don't wanna be left with that hope, but I still want to think about you, and I still have feelings for you." I think he even says that, "I still love you,"
Yeah, so he's I
in
mean,
this
he's
scene.
clearly playing to try and sleep with her,
Yeah.
and she entertains it to some degree, and you can tell that she's really yearning to go further. I think she even kisses him at one point, and they're
They're kissing each
playful.
other the entire time, like,
Right,
it's not like
she
lip on
flirts
lip
with him, but
contact.
she doesn't wanna go all the way through with that because she
Mhm.
knows it's going to continue to increase her emotional burden that she has to carry.
Exactly. But they're all up in each other's space, like, the entire like, he's always kissing her hand, she's always kinda kissing, like, his shoulder or his hand back, but it's never full lip on lip contact, which would be the most intimate, but it's always
Right.
just this is also after, they end up not having sex. Apparently, Paula sends Marianne a handwritten letter about wanting to meet and wanting to, like, become friends with each other. Johann is not about that at all. He, like, tears up the letter and
He
is
says, "So typical of Paula," who
yeah.
we should also add, her character has been engaged twice already. We were also informed of that during the
Who,
Paula scene.
Paula?
Mhm.
Yeah, which then after that, like, after Johann walks away, after reading the letter, it cuts to this shot, this, like, extreme zoom on Marianne's face, which screams to me, which again, that is her breaking point of, like, "This needs to end. I want to file for divorce," without saying a single word.
Mhm.
To which we then cut to the next episode, which is called The Illiterates, and immediately opens up to them in an office getting everything prepped for their divorce papers and going over all the assets, which I felt very happy about, is that this is the first time we kind of see Marianne liberated from this guilt, from, like, this longing to want to be with Johann to an extent. I mean, spoiler, they're literally signing their divorce papers and end up having sex on the floor at her
Mhm.
request.
So I have a couple of notes here, and to backtrack briefly to Veil of Tears, I literally wrote in my notes, is this a Swedish thing that people just kind of get along despite these horrible fucking circumstances and despite the fact that people treat you like dog shit? I think it's more a condition of her genuine love for him. I think it's far
Yeah.
more a condition of that. But I also have here that I was frustrated. I was actively frustrated watching that episode
Yeah.
because of how dog shit he treats her.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
and I have, like, "Girl, you need to move on." Like, he's
No.
snoozing during your emotional
Yes, I love the shot
diatribe.
of, like, her reading and then it cuts immediately to Johann just
Mhm.
which again, this man had 2 glasses of whiskey and a glass of wine. Like, that
Which he
man
drinks
is
whiskey now, by the way.
he
There
does.
are some subtle things that indicate that he has changed, so to speak, in his interests, and he's
Mhm.
trying new things in lives, and, he's being very experimental, and he has a new lease on life.
Sounds like a college professor. Shit's so
But
pretentious.
jumping back forward, yeah, right, to the beginning of this act,
Mhm.
the illiterates, and I have a note here, is she setting him up? Like, is she seducing him to have Paula walk in or something? What's going on here? We
Well,
later
because they
find out
keep
why, but
bringing up, like, what do they keep calling, is it a watchman?
oh, a
Yeah,
night
they keep
watchman, yeah,
mentioning a watchman coming in while they have sex, like, they
like a
mention it,
security
like,
guard.
4 or 5 times. Yeah, I guess that's what it I'm guessing that's what they meant. But I thought, again, I was frustrated with her wanting to be like, "I wanna have sex with you," but it comes back later in that episode, and it's just
Mhm,
like, wow. The tables have turned to where, the beginning of the movie, we see Johann pretty much have all the power in this relationship. Like, he
mhm.
is the head of this relationship. But now we get to this, and she completely owns this man.
Yeah, and let's
She
talk about it. the reason why she seduced him, she says, I wanted to have sex with you because I wanted to see if I still feel something. And I
Mhm.
felt nothing. I felt very faint attachment, and that was essentially it. I feel as though I finally moved on from you. And she even says, I don't say this to belittle you. And I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I thought that you should know that that's where I'm at now.
But good
And
for her because again, a lot of the scene, a lot of the movie was Johann having that overwhelming power over her and having these tools and these weapons to continue to beat her down, and now she has the means to do so without even having to seek another partner at this point. Like she is doing this all by herself and just coming into her own and showing herself that she can be strong without Johann in her life. First of all, this movie's rated PG,
yeah,
which is absolutely insane. Like I'm like, how? I don't know if like the rating system in Sweden is, a little bit more lax, but
it's
there's a
also
note.
73.
It is also 73. I have a note that here that says, "No way he pushed you have custody and I just paid child support. You can have those difficult conversations with the kids pertaining to she asks him to pay for a trip to Paris for their daughter. And he says, I don't have the money for that. I'm already borrowing a lot of money from my mom. We just have to tell her you can't go, but you can have that conversation because all I do is pay child support. Like, what a
Mhm.
fucking slime ball,
And we
dude.
see that earlier. I mean, throughout the duration of the film, Johann does not like ending conversations or having them in the first place. And Marianne
Correct.
informs him and us of that. It's not something
Comes back to him almost calling the mom, which, like, yes, he
right.
wants to break that routine, but he doesn't want to have that difficult conversation.
Correct. He's continuously non-confrontational, and it leads to his demise because here we see the entire breakdown of Johann. And here I was waiting in a sense because I'm so accustomed to the typical story arc of marriage and divorce, so to speak, in
Mhm.
film, where okay, there's going to be some justice served from Marianne to Johann. She's going to get his ass, and in a roundabout way she does, but not in a way that is theatrical. It's in a way that's very human, and in a way that takes time, and it's in a way that's very natural. And Johann essentially has deteriorated himself. We see in this episode he's a completely broken man. He has
Yeah.
not met the expectations in his life that he has set for himself, nor has he met the expectations that were set by other people. He's, of course, no longer happy with Paula and feels as though
Yes.
their relationship is boring now. And he is approaching this session to sign the divorce papers with the intention, we find out, of getting back together with Marianne. And she picked
Mhm.
up on that immediately. And she informs him of that. She says, sign them right now, then, because I know that you came into this wanting to get back into our life.
Which
Tell
is
me I'm wrong.
crazy to, like, see the parallels of that to where we go back to the episode Paula, and, she's literally, like, holding him, like, trying to, like, hold him together and not have him leave, and he pushes her off saying, like, "Get off of me." But now this is happening, and it's the reverse where
Mhm.
he is begging her not to go, and she's pushing him off, like, as they're trying to leave, and it gets into one of the craziest scenes in this movie
Yeah, he
where
turns into a real he was a dirtbag before, and he
this
reaches
guy
rock
turns
bottom here.
he beats the shit out of Marianne. Like, it's not done in a way where it's, like, violent, but it's very shocking because you weren't expecting I was not expecting violence in this movie. I
And
thought it was
neither
gonna be
was
a
Marianne, and it was so pointed the way that she says,
he
I she literally says, "I often warn my female clients to be sure that they are not isolated with their husbands when going over divorce proceedings. I never expected it to happen to me." And that
yeah.
was such a powerful line, such a powerful delivery. And here you are scared for her well-being.
He even
Some
mentions it while they're having that heated conversation,
He
which
says, "I
is
should have beat
also
you."
yeah, and this is
Mhm,
also the first time that we've seen Marianne have that angry conversation and show that emotion at Johann while he's in
mhm.
the room. Like she's yelling at him, she's talking about, like how she utilized sex in their relationship to kind of get what she wanted in life, knowing
Because
that
that was
that
the
was
only leverage she had.
correct.
Mhm.
At once she started beating her, like, that was I literally was I stopped writing notes after that. All I have was, "Oh my god, holy fuck, Johann, chill." Like, it's
Yeah.
just there's just, and she just like kind of comes up, she has her like her nose is bleeding, and that's when they finally sign the divorce papers, is after that, which is crazy. She even offers to have those papers, give those papers to Johann, and have Paula go over them to make sure that she didn't cheat him out of anything.
Yeah, so I thought that this was
this was the
also
best episode, dude.
it started out very frustrating at first because I'm thinking to myself, why is she going and having sex with him? Like, they're signing their divorce papers. Can our characters kind of move on here? And then it comes back around, it punches me right in the face and says, "It's justified, bitch. Like, this is human nature. You are watching."
She's not using sex as a means to try and save a marriage. She's using it to save herself and to show that she has grown.
To confirm to herself that she has.
Yes, exactly.
And it makes sense, and it comes back, and it's justified. And then you have this man, Johann, who by his own perception, has hit rock bottom. He wasn't happy in his marriage with his daughters. He wasn't happy with this 23-year-old mistress that he ran off
marriage with his daughters.
His marriage and his daughters is what. Okay,
there we go.
He's not succeeding in his job. He's financially unstable, and now he wants to come crawling back home to what is familiar to him, and now he can't have that either. So you are watching a man who is, by his own perception, left completely out of options. And unfortunately, sometimes in real life, that causes people to resort to violence because it's the only thing that he has control over in that moment is physical power over her. And it's so heartbreaking to watch. And it's disgusting to think that it's so realistic. I mean, it's not played off as goofy. It's not played off as melodramatic. It's played off as real. It's like someone put a camera in a room, a hidden camera, and you're watching it, and it sucks, but it's damn well done.
It is. I will say, like, it was hard to watch that, but again, it's played beautifully by Erland Joseph and Liv Ullmann. Like, they give the performance of a freaking lifetime in this movie. But this is the part where I kind of had my slight qualms with the movie.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Was in this next episode.
Okay.
In the middle of the night in a dark house. It opens up, which, first of all, shocking that it didn't open up in just a room, because I mean, in the last like couple of episodes, it's just opened up on a room, and that's where we are going to be staying for the majority of the episode. This is now on the street, and we see Marianne wave for a car to come by, and she gets picked up by fucking Johann. But I will say that this was also the part that it kind of confused me, where I'm like, there wasn't a lot of context as to how long it's been since this interaction.
It's been years.
Yeah.
I think like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, because
they mentioned the last time that they slept together was almost a year ago, or about a year ago, right? Or almost 2 years ago.
Well, this is where that comes into play, because Johann picks her up. They get into a car and they're driving to the cabin that we saw in Paula. And they talk about, you know, their current marriages that they're in, but that apparently that they've been having this affair for a while now. They're still together. Like, I'm just like, but why? Why? Like, in my mind, I'm saying why, but it's also like, you kind of have to think about, like, and she even says it, that they have been together, like, not even just married, together for almost 20 years. That's like, it's an adult lifetime. It's 20 years of your life with a person. I feel like it's very hard to try and cut that connection with a person that you have devoted a majority of your life to.
Well, unless they run off to Paris, abandon you and your children, and beat you. I mean, typically
correct. But again, there's a lot of situations, and people stay with worse people.
And let's also mention, because I was frustrated watching it. Because I hate infidelity. A whole nother topic. But I was upset at Marianne in a way, because she knows how hurtful it is. But then we find out that her marriage now, she has gone from being married to Johann, in which the marriage thrived in essentially everything other than their sex life. And now she's in a marriage in which that's the only redeeming quality. And she says that to him, and Johann doesn't want to hear it. but she enjoys having sex with her new husband, but he's also cheating on her constantly. And
Yeah.
she knows that. So again, Bergman is able to come back around and justify it, I guess, for Marianne and still allow her to be a redeemable character in my mind.
Correct. Because again,
Oh,
like opening up this episode, I'm like, you worked so hard to now finally be free of what has been keeping you captive for so long. And you
mhm.
did it in such a powerful way in the last episode. And now it's like, what is it all for? But again, it comes back around and says, oh, okay. So she is now not even just like remarrying, she's essentially remarrying a worse version of Johann.
Kind of, but also the opposite though, because again, it's a sex-based relationship.
Actually, you're right. It is the opposite
It
because
really is, and Henrique is this
everything worked. Like,
businessman who's so, socially oriented, it seems, and, everything that Johann is not, but he isn't able to provide the feeling of love and endearment that Johann was able to provide to Marianne at times in their past.
he even says that, like, Marianne, like, you were my best friend, you were my partner. Like that
Mhm,
they were friendly together. They could have fun together just as two people being together. But
mhm.
just the physical and sexual aspect of it was what started to put the wedge in their marriage. I mean, there was a lot of other things that did that, but
The
again,
routine Johann brings up, he hated the routine of their life, and everything was so planned, and everything was always by the book, and they knew what they were going to do every evening of every Sunday. They always are going to their parents' houses for dinner, so on and
yeah.
so forth. And it's heartbreaking in a way because Marianne wanted to break from that routine. We see that early on.
Yeah.
She did want to have that kind of
She
escape
wanted to do that to save the
and
marriage.
spend that
She
quality
want
time. But this is before she even knew that he was having an affair. And this movie ends with them in bed together, smiling at each other. And I think it's so interesting because in most films about marriage and heartbreak and relationships, a happy ending is one in which our two main characters finally end up together and they are finally happy in each other's presence. And they are happy in each other's presence. And in a way, they end up together, though they both have their respective marriages that they're going to go home to after this scene. It's not a
Mhm.
happy ending. I don't find this to be a happy ending in my mind. And in fact, it's frustrating to some degree. But these are people. Like there are people just like Marianne and just like Johann that really live in this world.
Not
They are
everything happens. Not everything ends in a way that you would like to, or in a way
right.
that's happy. And this movie,
But
like,
I
shows
do
that
think
to
it's
you.
interesting though that so take I don't know, La La Land, for example, where it's a love story and they don't end up together and they are happy in their own marriages now and they've gone their separate ways. And have you seen La La Land?
Yeah.
So they don't end up together there, right? And that's considered
Hmm.
to me, I would consider that a bittersweet ending. They are not
Yeah.
ending up together. And in most cases, when the couple doesn't end up together, it's displeasing to the viewer in some sense because
Hmm.
you know what was there, you know what they had, and that's not how they're going to continue to live their life. But now we know they have each other. They will probably continue to see each other going forward. And who knows, maybe they'll end up remarried in 30 years in their
Who
elderly
knows?
age, right? But it's not really a happy ending. But it's a good ending. It's a very good ending.
It's a bittersweet, leaning more towards sweet. Because
I
I
think
did
leaning more
feel
towards bitter
like,
in my mind.
despite everything that we have witnessed and despite everything that has happened, like during the last scene of the movie, she wakes up from a nightmare where I guess they're in a car together and she is trying to rescue the children and Johann, but she looks at her hands and there's just stubs. Again, we're left with this scene or just this image of Johann comforting Marianne and just making sure that she's okay. She even says that like she has a fever. He gets her all like tucked in to make sure that like she's comfortable and that they're just having a conversation with each other. Kind of like, I'm guessing how the relationship might have started, like just it's not sexual, it's nurturing. Like
Mhm.
he is there being a partner and being a friend towards Marianne. And I
Right.
was
If
like,
there's no
where
sex,
I'm
you're right. It's an endearing
there is
time
no
that they have together.
there's no sexual aura in this episode at all, where the last two episodes, specifically the not the one before this, the other one, was very sexually driven, and so was the last episode. But this one, you don't get that. It's just more sweet. Like like there's even like funny moments. Like he calls the neighbor and asks if they can use the cabin next door
Oh,
because their neighbor isn't there. And they walk into this cabin and it's fucking filthy. There's shit. There's like my favorite thing is like the little clown thing in
right.
the middle of the room that they're both laughing at. Like they're having a good time cleaning this seemingly random person's cabin.
Yes, and
Um,
Johann is continuing to abandon the person that he claims to be consistent with. So,
correct.
yeah, I mean, definitely he's not a sympathetic character. And again, I get that. I love that because that's how movies should be. Like there should be conflict and it should leave you feeling some type of way, any type of
Mhm.
way towards these characters, whether it be negative or positive. And you kind of see that Johann he doesn't really change much throughout the course of this film. He's still
No.
someone who is never satisfied with his current state of affairs. And that's just
Yeah.
very clear. And there are
We
people
could
like that. I
we consistently see him on a decline where Marianne we keep seeing on an uphill. Like her character arc is building and it's
Mhm.
amazing to see the final product that we get from that.
Yes. I think that the 5 stages of grief could be very easily applied to Marianne's story arc throughout this film. I think that
Yeah.
you could probably find if you wanted to go back and lay a label of the 5 stages, then you could. Except for maybe denial, because right immediately Marianne is not denying that this is happening. She fully accepts it and immediately starts working
Yeah, she
to
goes to
better that.
step 5 like
Right.
immediately. It's
Yeah.
just accepting the fact and what can we do to continue this marriage now that this new person is here. But
So, do you have any final thoughts before we dive in?
just one. I kept bringing this back to a separation to where
Sure.
while yes, like the separation aspect in that movie was one of the driving forces, we were also left with this like almost murder mystery. But again, this movie, at least to me, made it very clear who you are supposed to be rooting against,
Mhm.
and it stays pretty consistent. Like you are rooting against Johan, and there's a reason for it, and it stays consistent throughout the whole
Yes.
movie. Whereas with the separation, Nadir, the father figure, where you're kind of almost rooting for him because again in all of his views like he's correct until it's not. And so like it's kind of like this uphill, like you're rooting for him, and then there's this turning point where it's like, oh, he's not a redeemable character. Like he
Uh,
he has his
I don't know. Well, and I guess I would have to revisit our conversation on that, but he was definitely far more redeemable of a character than Johann is in my mind.
oh well no, and
He
and I'm not saying he isn't, but like there's
sure.
aspects where like you have this the movie is telling
There's less
you.
clarity. There's less
Yeah,
clarity
that
in how you
you're
should feel
supposed to
about this
be
person.
not rooting for, but like you see that Nadir has a lot more redeeming qualities. He doesn't want to leave his family. He wants to keep it all together. But then it's also he's lying about what he's seen to again keep the family together. So like a lot of his methods of wanting to keep his family together are
Mhm.
not the most pleasant. Whereas Johan, it's just this guy's a slime ball and he's going to continue to be throughout the entire movie. Like it's just, and
And
you're
he
just going to
does.
see this
Yeah,
man
and he
decline.
does. He continues to get worse, and I wouldn't say that the final act does provide him with any, redemption, but
No, I
she
still
loves
hated
him,
his guts
and it's
after
so
that.
and what I have to understand as a viewer who was objectively frustrated. Let me say I was frustrated in a good way, even with Marianne. It's frustrating to see her go back to someone who has physically and emotionally hurt her so badly.
Yeah.
But she's so convincing in her genuine organic love for him. I don't really know how to put it into words, but it's made clear to us that he is the apple of her eye. He is everything to her and will always be. And we kind of learn, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like she's really fully moved on, as she said that she did in their divorce proceedings, because
No.
here they are back together in bed as the credits start to roll.
Hmm.
And with
But
that, would you like to take a quick break and we can hop into the rankings?
yeah, you got it. Would
Awesome.
you
I
like
have
some
to
water?
say, this has been one of my favorite discussions that we've had.
Oh my God.
I don't
Yeah.
know if it'll I have to sit with it. I don't know if it'll end up being my favorite movie that we've watched so far, but I think we had a great discussion about it. And it's been so far a pleasure talking about just the story, really, and the performances. And we have a lot more to dive into because there are some things that I didn't like particularly about this movie. that
Same.
we're going to dive into when we get to our rankings. But yeah, let's take a quick break and hop right into it.
So welcome back. Sorry, I had to pee. I don't know what Parker was doing, but we talked a lot about this movie. Like that was probably one of the heavier discussions we've had about a movie in a while. So props to that. But we needed some liquid courage. But we will dive into these rankings with starting off as always with enjoyability and rewatchability. So this one, it's tough because watching this movie, I had a really good time specifically for the performances, but this isn't a movie that I really want to revisit or is something that I'm like, hey, you guys want to watch scenes from a marriage? However, the way that I will rewatch it is this actually was re-released as a mini series on HBO, I think in 2021.
Well, it's an
with
American version.
Yes, correct. It's an American version with Oscar Isaac and oh my god,
Dallas
who else?
Howard? Bryce Dallas Howard? Is it?
Oh, if it is, I love her.
Oh no,
I don't
I
think
was
it is.
dead
No,
wrong.
it's Jessica Chastain.
Oh,
They do
okay.
look very similar.
Yeah.
Named Jonathan Levy and Mira Phillips. So not
Yeah, I could
the
almost
exact
guarantee you it's going to be
characters.
way worse. I will also maybe give it a try. I
Like
almost did
worse
right
as in
after.
just like quality or
Yeah, I just don't think it'll be as poignant. I almost put it on immediately after finishing the movie last night just to kind of
yeah.
see. I put it on accidentally at first on HBO because HBO has both of them.
But again, that's probably the only way that I would really like revisit the film. But again, while watching it, it was again some of the best performances I have ever seen in a movie. So I went and gave that an 11 out of 15.
Yeah, so this is a tough category because it's a strenuous experience watching this movie. And it's not a task. It's not a task in the same way that I felt that Human Condition was a task to get through. So I enjoyed it. However, I agree with you. I don't feel the urge to revisit it. And that often happens with these types of movies that have these heavy topics. And it's not a flaw of the movie per se. However, it's not one of those movies that you're just going to put on. I would likely revisit the full-length Swedish version. However, I'm less inclined to do so than I was with Fanny and Alexander. I give this let me see here. What did I give Fanny and Alexander? A 10. I gave Fanny and Alexander a 10, so I am going to go with a 9 here, which is what I have down. I really enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not a feel-good movie per se, and it's not one that you're going to revisit very often. So 9 is actually kind of a high score for this type of movie in my mind. But I really did enjoy the way that it was presented, and feel good with a 9 there. But with the story, the story was excellent. I mean, this is one of the better crafted stories, I think, that we've found so far. And it's also very focused because you aren't trying to tell the story of a plethora of different characters. You're not trying to tell a story of, multiple storylines. There's really one storyline that's going on here. And it's the through line of the 10 years that span, between these two characters. I think, I'm going to give it a 14.
Ooh.
I think that was really well done. I mean, it's so well written. The story stays so focused, and it tells you a tale of reality. It tells you a tale of human nature to some degree. And as frustrating as it can be, it's a genuine story that I think is well told. So I would feel comfortable giving it a 13, but I'm going to give it that little bump because it's up there. I gave a Separation a 13. This is right on par, I think, story-wise. I'm going to stick it with the 14 though, because it subverts your expectations too. Something I just want to touch on real quick. For as straightforward as the story is, I still found that my expectations were being subverted. I was still kind of surprised by some events that took place.
So I originally gave this a 13, but just like over the course of this conversation of just showing like how well crafted the story is and just like, the subtle elements that we get that aren't explicitly told to us, but we can still catch those moments of, we didn't need to see Paula, but we felt like Paula was a character in this movie the whole time. And
right.
obviously
So
we didn't
well
even
done.
see her. We didn't speak a lick of dialogue. but she was such a pivotal part in this that like we were only introduced to by just dialogue.
Props to the actors for having that vision of Paula in their minds, because there's obviously no one cast as Paula. So I just wanted to say that.
Then who was in the picture, Parker?
Igmar Bergman.
I was literally going to say, what if it's just a picture of Ingmar Bergman? Just off a fucking random side note, did you ever watch Scary Movie? Yeah, so like when like she Anna Faris goes to the police station and the police officer's like, why don't you take a picture of why don't you take a look at this picture? And it's like these very like ridiculous looking pictures of this police officer in like a bikini. That's what I'd like to imagine that picture was
That's
just
Paula.
Ingmar Bergman
And a
in
speedo.
yeah, pretty much. That'd be really funny. What I was going to mention in the first episode was this was such a good way to provide exposition without making it feel like a dump. Like it's in an interview setting, you're getting introduced to these characters and getting plopped into the situation, but it doesn't feel like you're in class. You don't feel like you're getting lectured onto what's going on. Like it feels very natural. And that's all just told through the story. So I'll agree with you. I'll give that a 14 out of 15 as well. Going into the lasting impression, I mean, I feel like all marriage-based movies should be based or should follow what Scenes from a Marriage is going for. Like, again, I will always revert back to Marriage Story. I thought up until this point, that was probably one of the more dramatic and one of the best portrayals of this type of story because it had that energy from Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. It built us up to that like final scene in such a beautiful way and had such a satisfying ending. And I don't feel we get movies like Marriage Story or even A Separation without this. So I feel like this movie coming out in 73 has left such a lasting impression in cinema that I want to go ahead and give it a 13 out of 15.
Wow. Yeah, I like what you have to say there in terms of the influence, so to speak, that it's had over this genre, which is always, there is a certain subgenre of films about dissolved marriages, right? That could be its own little pocket of
which I don't feel like there's very many of them because it's such a difficult topic to talk about because it's so real.
Right. So yes, I agree with you that it has that lasting impression in terms of other works that it will influence. I would also say that the impact that I foresee this having on me going forward is a reminder that people are imperfect and that every day people make decisions that are objectively horrible that they feel is self-justified. And that is just a fact of life, that there aren't storybook happy endings. There aren't people without flaws. There aren't people who make decisions solely based off the well-being of the people around them. And that's just a fact of life. And I think that this movie does a very good job of informing you of that bleak reality. I don't think that it's going to be one that I really sit and simmer with. Not one that, for the difficulty of the subject matter, I didn't find myself incredibly emotionally shaken by the end of the film, if I'm being honest with you.
It wasn't a tearjerker.
Right. I was satisfied by it. And I was unsatisfied by it at the same time. I was frustrated, but it's not one where I was in my head really thinking about all of the ins and outs, really wanting to continue to chew on it. I'm going to give it up from a 10, an 11.
All right.
And
you feel comfortable with that?
I feel comfortable with that. I'm leaning much closer to a 10 than I would be a 12. I think that 11 is a good spot for me here.
What about visual and auditory?
So I'll be interested to see what you have to say for this. I was not a fan of the way that this movie looked. It was shot on 16 millimeter. It has, I don't know what the aspect ratio.
It looks like it too. It's very grainy.
It's so grainy. And it had a different aspect ratios. You may know better than I was, like a 1:37 or something. Or
I wasn't honestly paying attention to that.
But it didn't fill the screen, which is fine. I don't have an issue with the aspect ratio. I do have an issue with the graininess. And also, I get what they were going for here. let's see.
It was
This
shot
movie,
in 1.37 by
yeah,
1.
okay,
So
so
yeah.
1.37. And
Yeah.
I get what the cinematographer, Sven Nykvist is his name. I get what he's going for with these dramatic zooms, and it works to
Yeah, that
some degree,
was
but it's also I don't
kind of
know.
silly.
I wish that we kind of just sat in the room without much of that. I would have
Yeah.
liked to just kind of sat back and watched it as a fly on the wall, and they went the opposite direction with a close up on the emotions that are going through their brains, and I get that direction. It didn't work for me, and the film is it's incredibly grainy to the point where pieces of the background are moving around on the screen because they're so pixelated almost. I give it a
Yeah.
5.
Yeah.
I didn't love the way that it looked, if I'm being completely honest, and that's probably my biggest gripe with the movie. Fanny and Alexander, you get this whimsical scenery and this sweeping cinematography, and it works for the story that Fanny and Alexander is telling. And this is a very different type of approach to the camera
Mhm.
work, and I get what they're going for. It just didn't quite work for me. And yeah, it's super grainy. I mean, it was
Yeah. And I mean, Fanny and Alexander just felt like such a bigger movie in
yes,
general. Like, I
yes.
know we get like a lot of these like close knit scenes, or they're like maybe like in one part or the other. But again, it just feels like a much grander scope. Like, to your point in that episode, you talked about the blocking in that and how it was
Mhm.
just spectacular, especially in the Ekdal house, like in the mansion where, everything is so choreographed. And again, a lot of this, like, it didn't need that choreography because this movie played out like this could be a stage play.
Yeah,
Like, it
definitely.
could just be like you're sitting there, you're in this one scene, you're watching these two act their ass off, and just
And
that's
no
all you
score.
need
I
to
don't think
see.
there was a score really to speak of, was
Not
there?
real. I don't even think so. And
I don't
that's
think I
why
think similar to a separation, there was no,
there's barely one. At least like at the end there might have been, but
sure.
again, it's throughout the movie. There doesn't need a score
It
because it's
doesn't need
not
one,
fitting.
yeah.
No.
My
And
gripe
that's
is mainly with what I'm looking at as opposed to the auditory side of this, but
correct. And that's why I gave it a 6.
mhm.
Just because like there's not anything visually appealing. Like, even trying to find like scenes to put in the thumbnail was so
I bet.
difficult.
Yeah.
Like, the thumbnail for this video literally looks like it's gonna be a boxing match because it's like the normal like picture that we get of just the two of them in bed. It's the poster. And then on the left side is Johan looking this way and Marianne is looking the other way. Like, it literally looks like the main event, Johan versus Marianne. Like,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of shots that surprised me or like that wowed me.
Absolutely
Really, the
agree.
only one that I keep thinking of is just the zoom in on Marianne's
Yeah.
face at the end of
Eh,
the Veil of Tears. Like, it was so jarring.
I could go
Um,
lower if I'm being honest, but
yeah.
I think I'm not going to. I think that it works
Okay.
to a degree. I wish that some different approaches were taken, but I get what they're going for, and yeah, it is
I
what it
get that.
is. It's
Yeah.
definitely the weakness of the film in my
It
mind.
this wasn't a movie that needed to have like Lawrence of Arabia type
Well,
shots.
no, definitely not, but you could have stationary long takes where there's not much camera movement, and we didn't really have many of those in this
I can
in this
only
movie.
the only one I could really think of is Marianne in while they're signing the divorce papers when she's like letting out her emotion. Like, that was probably the only take where like I could remember was steady and that was following her very well, that
Mhm.
made sense. But a lot of the times it's just a lot of shots of them just like closed up, huddled up, and it just feels almost a little claustrophobic.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, for pacing, and this is where my gripe is, that I gave it an 8, only because, like, so I don't know if it's because this was a foreign language film or there was maybe some subtitles that I missed, but I could not tell at certain points where we were at in terms of like the timeline of this movie. Like,
Okay.
besides like obviously like the final episode, it's like, yes, like they have been married for a couple years to other people, but jumping from the second episode to the third episode to the fourth episode to the fifth episode, I'm like, but where are we?
Yeah, I think you probably did miss some subtitles. I never had that issue, I wouldn't say, moving through it. However, I also wasn't I was okay with it being a vague period of time. It didn't bother me
Okay.
personally.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from.
But that's why I'm like, but other than that, I mean, the story and the scenes played out very naturally and very well to the point where I wasn't upset with how the story was moving forward. I was just more so confused at like what moment in time are we at in these people's lives as these events go on. But I
Mhm.
mean, that's literally like it's my only gripe with the film entirely.
Other
But
than
what
the
did you
visual and
say?
auditory appeal.
Besides that, yeah, no, that's well, I feel like mainly that score is because we're not expecting these crazy shots, but also to your point, like there could be some shot selections that could have been better. But what did you think of the pacing?
Yeah, I think that the title cards help the pacing. They do a very good job of setting the scene,
I
and
did
they're
like that a
very
lot.
well titled. That
Yeah,
they're very well titled. I don't know what it is. I
I
enjoyed
love
it.
Paula.
Right.
Like that is the entire episode. That's the entire episode. That's gonna be the wedge.
Or the illiterates. That episode, they literally say to each other, "We are emotionally illiterate." I mean, they were quite apt, in my
Yeah,
opinion, and it helped. I think it helped move the story along because they are little vignettes that you take out of the 10-year period that they're spending mostly apart from each other. And I had to remember as the viewer, while every scene that we're watching involves these two characters, between these scenes, so much time has passed. And you know what? Maybe a small nitpick. They could have, to your point, done a better job of showing us the way that these characters have changed over the course of their time apart. But that's not a pacing issue. I think that's more of a story issue.
yeah,
I also give the pacing an 8. I think that for the most part, it moved along well. However, there were some times where I was ready for it to move on. And some of that may have to do with the subject matter making me frustrated, to be completely honest. There weren't
hmm
many times where I would check the runtime. However, at one point, I did pause and just kind of made myself something to eat and took a
yeah.
break and then dove back into it. And that helped. I don't think that was an issue with the runtime. I just was kind of there were some points where my interest lagged just a little bit. So I'm
Yeah.
closer again. I like doing this where I let you know which way I'm leaning towards. I'm leaning closer to a 9 than I am a 7. But I'm gonna match you on that 8.
Acting,
Acting,
I
we've
feel like
already
we both
discussed it.
agree on.
Yep.
This is the first movie where we have given acting a 10 out of 10.
I mean, just to reiterate that they were put these two actors were put in a challenging circumstance. They had to, I mean, both of them had to carry the entire weight of this film practically.
Mhm.
And
Especially during the second and third act. Like there's no other characters after the third episode.
right.
Like
And I think what you see often is actors are crying because they're upset, right? But in reality, when you feel tears coming on, typically it's human nature to try not to cry and to try and suppress that. And I think that both of these actors do such a good job of allowing you as the viewer to see their thought process in a way that's not verbalized. And the body language that they display throughout this, the depth of thought going on behind their eyes throughout the duration of this film was spot on. And from pretty early on, I felt that way. And I wrote down a couple of times like these performances are spectacular. This again, we said the same thing for Lawrence of Arabia when it comes to the visual appeal. You save a 10 for instances such as this, where there are two outstanding performances that you just don't
mhm.
see every day. I mean,
No, and I mean
massive
it's
credit to both of them.
yeah, and again, it's what sets the standard, and I feel like giving a score to acting, it needs to be the cast that there's not one that falters. Like I'd say, like even a separation, like they played their parts very well, but then it got broken down by
The
the
one
husband
guy.
of the caretaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it just takes one performance to turn it from like a 10 to a 9 or a 9 to an 8, but I feel like it benefited us knowing that like these two were going to remain the characters that we see through the entirety of the movie, which even then the other actors that we saw, like the first couple, they played their parts perfectly. Like
Mhm.
they set it up to where the audience thinks that, oh my god, this marriage is broken, it's awful, it can't get much worse than this, but it certainly does. But that's all in part to the other two actors setting that up for the audience. And then, Johan and Marion continuing to build on that and give these performances that,
Yeah.
I'll never forget it.
In what was the name? Was it no, in The Illiterates? You really feel how depraved Johan is. You can feel that emanating off of him.
Mhm.
And in Paula,
he's feeling mediocre.
Dude, I felt like throwing up. I felt like throwing up when he breaks it to her. I'm being serious that he's been having an affair for 4 years. And you can see Marianne's character just completely break down internally in front of your eyes. And to see the contrast between what you can tell she's genuinely feeling and what she's portraying to the screen and to Johan. There is so much depth to these performances. We could do an entire episode in my mind about breaking down the way that they approach these characters. The credit to Bergman, the way that they were directed.
Oh yeah.
It was beautiful to watch, and it sucked to watch at the same time. And that's how I feel when you can really hate someone who's a character, it's a good performance, and it allows you to empathize with them on a very deep level. So, we could go on, as I said, all day.
Of course.
I'm sure it helped your score, though, for suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, throughout the entire time, you're not really taken aback. I would say what's keeping me from giving it, because I'm going to give it an 8 at first. Only because, again, we get through the illiterates and we get this amazing moment for Marion, who has overcome what has been dragging her down this entire movie, and that's Johan. And she finally has overpowered this man who has put such a tight grip on her entire, pretty much for her entire adult life, and that she's finally overcome it. And I was almost screaming at my television, yeah, let's go! To when she finally had that moment, to then get that in the next episode, to now they're just back together again. And I'm just oh, well, so then what was that entire scene for?
Sure.
Some of the best acting I've ever seen in a movie was in The Illiterates, and then we get the next episode and it's just kind of then why did we get that if they're just gonna get back together again? So that's the part where I'm I could kind of see okay, what I mentioned earlier, it could be difficult to really cut ties entirely with a person that you've spent your majority of your adult life with, but you made it sound like it was pretty fucking bad, dude. It was,
and it was. He beat her. He
did.
That is something that
right
happened.
back, and that's where I'm I couldn't believe that. So that's why I feel comfortable leaving it at an 8.
Okay. The reason that you give it an 8 is the reason I give it a 10. Because how many times in your life, Felix, have you thought, I can't believe, for example, that she's going back to him? How often do you see it in reality? It is an unfortunate fact of life that things such as this are things that actually happen. At no point did I feel like I was taken out of it. And I understand what you're saying. You had that whole scene where she renounces him, essentially, and she declares that she has moved on. And that's great and empowering. However, sometimes things just don't work out like that. And it's unfortunate. And I agree with you in the sense that it's sad. I would love for Marianne to have her legitimate comeback moment where she moves on with her life fully, and she goes on and thrives and has Johan completely out of her mind. But it's real.
That's
man.
A movie moment. Yeah.
But it's real. This is real reality, and it's frustrating, and it makes you feel dirty, and it makes you feel guilty to some degree. And it just sucks. But I think it did a really good job of staying within the reality of these characters, and their decisions, as much as I would disagree with them, felt internally justified by the script and by the performances. And there was I think the fact that this movie was confined to so few locations and so few characters allowed it to have grace from anything that could take the audience out of the reality that we're viewing. So you are just following these two. I would say that do I want to give it a 9 here? Because of the fact that their daughters
for suspension of disbelief?
I'm wavering now because I will say for a couple that has 2 daughters, for them to be completely absent from the film and for there to be scenes in which they are actually yelling at each other and there's no "Mom, is everything okay?" I really
Yeah,
think
but
something.
a lot of the conversations are based around the children, but we never see that. Like,
Yeah.
we only see them in that first shot,
Put
and
a
we
9
never.
on there. Put a 9 on there for
I
me.
was gonna say, I'm like,
Yeah.
you're gonna set the standard for suspension of disbelief for
And
this
it's so
movie,
close, but that there's a little bit of that flaw there, and
which
however,
I
I
could.
will say that your gripe with it is what I find to be believable in a
That's
sense.
fair.
It didn't have its movie moment. You don't get your fairy tale movie ending, and
So to that extent, I will also change my score, and I'll
hmm.
stick with you with
So
the
we end
9
up
as
with the
well.
same average we would have anyway.
Yeah, that's fair because but that's to your point though. Like
Sure.
as much as I would have had that be my gripe with the movie, that makes perfect sense because it emulates life
Mhm.
in a way. Like this movie continues to tell you that like while this may be a film that you're watching like on a screen, like it's obviously like these are actors playing roles. This is a snapshot and a portrayal of the human condition.
Mhm.
This is a portrayal of a separation of two people who have spent the majority of their lives together, and it's heartbreaking and it's tough. And it might not be the ending that you want, but in reality, that's what it is. So for originality, what do you think?
So a lot of these categories are difficult because it is original in the way that it tells the story that it's telling. However, it does not present any like, and it doesn't have to because it's not the movie we're watching. But think of something, for example, that I would give a perfect 10 would be something that gives us a story of equal magnitude and tells it in such an original way without, not without, but I think with adding way more elements to it. Something that creates its own world and has all of this story building and lore that is completely original. And I get that that's not what this movie is going for. But I'm not going to give it a 10 because it just doesn't feel right. I'm struggling with it between an 8 and a 9. And I think,
Do you want me to tell you my score and see
yeah,
if
I'm
that'll
leaning towards an
alter?
8, but go ahead. Go ahead. You can put an 8 down for me. I don't have much
Okay.
to say other than it kind of feels right for me there.
Well, we're continuing to be pretty similar because I also gave it an 8 out of 10.
Okay. What's
Because
your you probably are able to articulate it better than I am.
that's a big promise. I can't articulate for shit. But what I would say
Don't
is that
Johan
again,
yourself, man. Don't
don't
Johan yourself.
I won't Johan. I'm mediocre. But no, what I would say is that like where while we get a lot of these stories like later on in history, I feel like it's like what I made the point that I made earlier that we don't get a lot of like these other like divorce stories. I feel like without this movie, and I'm sure that there's plenty of movies before this that dive into divorce as much as a taboo topic it would have been prior to the 1970s, because I mean it's still even taboo today, but not as much as it would have been like
Sure. And
50 or
and
60
again,
years ago.
it depends on the culture too, because even in a
Correct.
2011 film, divorce is much more taboo in a separation, right, than it is
Yeah,
in this film, which takes place in 73. So the culture has every bit as much to do with the taboo nature of it than does the time. But
I
I get what you're
agree.
saying. Absolutely.
But again, this was presented in a way that at least like original to me, where it's a movie that for the most part it's it's carried on by two heavy performances, but it's not in a sense marketed that way where it's like, oh, like this movie, like you want to watch this movie because it has these two performances. It just has like two people in it, or like, like I keep thinking about like that Robert Redford movie where there's like no dialogue and it's just him and he's on a boat. I keep forgetting what the movie is called, but
Meg,
The Meg. Robert
while you're
Redford
pulling that up,
boat.
if you have
Oh,
it
I have
already.
it here. All is
Yeah.
Lost,
Okay.
2013. It's
I
literally
haven't
just
seen it.
him, and he just says it has 51 spoken English words in the entire movie.
Wow.
But that's the almost the marketing behind it. Whereas, this is just it's scenes from a marriage, and this is the story of these two characters. Like I had not seen something that has such crazy performances from people that don't express that much emotion until it's needed. And I
Mhm.
guess that could, play into the acting score, which it's already maxed out. There's not much more we could do. I feel like in terms of movies about marriage and about divorces, this was done in a way that, I kind of have to see what I gave a separation, because I feel like
Mhm.
I said the same thing where
For
it's
originality or for attachment? Because
for
I do have to
originality. Sorry.
I wanna add, in terms of originality, I wanna commend it for being original in the sense that it doesn't fall into the trope of following the avenues that the audience wants. It doesn't fall into the trope of pleasing the audience, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think it is original in that sense, in which it tells its story unabashedly. So I
And
think it's
that's
original in that sense.
and that's where I'll leave it then. I gave a separation a 9 because it was a divorce story that also had a sense of a murder mystery, which I literally had not seen before.
Mhm.
And I thought that that was a little bit more of an original take on this matter, whereas this is just strictly you're watching these two work through their relationship.
Mhm.
Whereas it was told in that way, I wouldn't say that it's the most original thing that I have ever seen.
Would you have liked to seen, a scene in which these characters are apart and maybe one is longing for the other? I don't know. Just a thought. That
No, I don't think so.
no?
I feel like the way that we watch it kind of works where it's like the point that you made. It's life. Like we're not going to get that movie moment of, seeing Johan be with Paula and be like, "Wow, I really do miss Marianne," and like look out at a window and have it fucking zoom out or
Yeah,
whatever, like
yeah.
showing longing, and then have a split screen of Marianne looking in the opposite direction where they're both looking
That's
in the
not what I
middle.
meant, but yes, yeah.
But no, I get what you mean. Like that we have a moment of where, like a moment in between, like the last episode and the second to last episode, where they have this giant argument, and we get that, like, where does we get that connection that brings them back together in the end.
So how attached do you feel?
A
Are you
two.
hanging on?
No.
A 2?
So again, as much as I enjoyed watching this movie, and as much as I, really appreciated everything that the movie was going for, and again, it's a performance that I don't know if we'll ever see again, but we also have almost 92 more movies to go. It's not something that I'm going to be, chewing on or holding on to for the rest of my life. And I don't feel like I want to push the score any higher. So that's where I'll leave it, is at a 2.
So I'm looking at my prior rankings, and this is funny the way that, these rankings kind of work and they change. Your opinions on things change with time. I gave Fanny and Alexander a 3, but the more that I distance myself from it, the more that I wish I gave it a 4. With that being said, it's just a little tangent. I think that I will give this a 3 because it feels right. I think it's kind of right there in the middle, erring on the side of positive. Feels good.
You're
It
loving you
feels
some
horrible, but
Bergman,
that
dude.
score feels good. I do love me some Bergman. It seems to be the case.
Have you
However, I
seen
mean, you
Bergman
ended up with
films?
a higher score. You ended up with a higher score than I did.
I know that's the positive person in me, I feel like. But have you seen Bergman films before we did this podcast?
No, my door just opened on its own. I have not though.
What do you mean your door just opened? Good lord.
Sorry.
But okay. But I mean that's fun though, because now it's like you ventured into a new director's like kind of filmography,
And we're gonna
and
get more. We're gonna get more.
we're definitely getting a lot more. So it spells out very well for the rest of this podcast. So with that,
Let's
we
do
give
it.
the average. Hold on,
Oh
hold
yeah,
on.
dang! I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Oh my god.
What's the average score?
A 79, the same as Lawrence of Arabia, which is very interesting.
Hmm. So
So
we haven't had this happen yet.
we haven't. So this is full. Hold on. Let me at least put it in there. It's not at the third just yet. Okay.
So in this case, I have a thought that maybe we could average just our attachment scores as means of a tiebreaker, or we can simply leave it as a tie. Or
No, dude. This is America. We need a winner.
how do you think we should approach this? Because it's not something we've discussed yet.
So I do like the idea of giving like basing it off of our attachments. because I loved both of these movies in different ways. Like, I had such a fun time watching Lawrence of Arabia, but I really appreciated what Scenes from a Marriage gave us in
Mhm.
terms of acting. I mean, these are also both of the movies that we have given a perfect 10 for a category, with Lawrence of Arabia being a 10 for visual and auditory, and Scenes from a Marriage for acting.
If you gave it a
Well,
3,
I gave it a 3.
I gave it a
Lawrence of
2. So
Arabia.
we're at this exact same average for
So, but then that also falls
Okay,
under
let
what does this list actually mean,
let's
Parker?
make this our standard, of course, going forward. Our first tiebreaker in the event of this happening, our first tiebreaker will be to average the attachment category. Yes.
Yes.
I think it'd be fair for our second tiebreaker to be who had the higher score from an individual overall.
Okay.
Does that sound fair to you? I mean, I know for a fact that that would put Lawrence of Arabia at second and Scenes third because you gave Lawrence a much higher score.
I
But I
did.
feel
It's the second
you
highest score I've given a movie.
so yeah, I think and obviously I would disagree with it because my score for Scenes is higher than mine for Lawrence. However, I feel that that would be fair, objectively speaking. If one movie really stood out to one of the two of us, it could serve as a tiebreaker.
Yeah. Because
Because
what did
I
you
have a
give?
feeling that you feel more strongly about Lawrence of Arabia than I feel
Than me.
about Scenes from a Marriage. So I think that that's a fair way to go. Whoever has the higher score overall from either of the individuals.
Yeah. So whoever has. So what did you give Lawrence of Arabia?
My total score for Lawrence of Arabia was 72.
Good God.
What was yours?
87.
So Lawrence of Arabia, with our scores averaged, is actually a 79.5. I'm not sure where them. I trust what we have on the screen here.
So, all right. So then there we have it. That is our official ranking so far. We're only 2 away from having a top 10, Parker, which is crazy to me.
Yep.
Um,
We're
if
almost a tenth of the way through.
this is so ridiculous, but I love it. But with that,
Will we get our fifth foreign language film in a row?
I will fucking cry. I miss English so much. As much as, again, I have not seen this many foreign films in my entire life, and they have, again, look at our rankings. High and Low is the number one movie we've watched, and it's a Japanese film from the 60s that I hadn't heard of until we did this. But I'm glad. Like, I'm glad with the foreign films that we have chosen.
Yeah, I'm loving this so far.
But
And I do think when we were discussing before, like which list we should do, like the Letterboxd list definitely gives us. It's by far probably the most adventurous list out there in terms of its age of films and its diversity of language. Only about 40% of the top 100 on Letterboxd are English language films, so it makes sense.
But with that,
Spin that thing.
let's spin this thing, bro.
Ha-
No. No. Don't do that.
What is it?
It'll make the wheel spin faster. Love Exposure.
I've never heard of this.
I have not either, but let's pull up the Letterboxd.
From 2000.
I've not heard of this film, but it's in the 2000s, which is nice. Love Exposure.
Okay, what are we getting into here? Jesus, forgive this morons.
Forgive this. That's not correct.
Are we about to give a Scott Pilgrim similar?
I'm sorry, but what is this like?
I don't know what language it's in. Forgive me.
I don't know either. I feel really bad.
It is
Japanese.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's a Japanese film.
I was like, this looks like Japanese, but I don't want to get canceled.
So what are we diving into here?
Jesus, forgive this morons.
This is, I want to add, this is currently the number 76. So when we made this list, it was the number 75. It's now the number 76 film on Letterboxd.
Yeah. It also doesn't help that where to watch, it just says Amazon disc. So it's like
That'll be
only.
fun.
That'll be fun to figure that out. But the story of a teenage boy named Yu who falls for Yoko, a girl he runs into while working as an upskirt photographer in an offshoot of the porn industry. Oh, hell yeah. His attempts to woo her are complicated by a spot of cross-dressing, which convinces Yoko that she is a lesbian. Dalliances with kung fu and crime, and a constant struggle with the guilt that's a legacy of his Catholic upbringing.
Dude,
What is
there's
this?
so much going on in that one description.
What is this movie?
So we've got kung fu, we've got an offshoot of the porn industry, we've got someone
Cross-dressing.
finding out their true sexuality, we've got a Catholic upbringing and a Japanese foreign film, or a foreign film for us, a Japanese film.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Sounds like we're going from a movie with one singular storyline to one that's going to have a whole lot going on.
With 5.5 thousand fans. And
a 4.4
the majority
average
of it is a 4.4 with 40% of that being 5 stars. But we'll see. I mean, look at the human condition. Look what we did to that movie.
Mm-hmm. And again, and obviously this is not a negative that I'm saying this. I think a lot of these movies have extravagant runtimes, but we are looking at nearly 4 hours here again.
No way.
Yeah, 237 minutes is the runtime.
What the fuck?
It's okay, right, man. Hey, I have to give credit. Most of these films have felt shorter than their runtime.
That's fair, and I feel like this movie might have a lot that'll just keep it running. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. It definitely has an interesting premise. And if you have heard of this movie, let us know what you think about it, because I would certainly like to know where the fan base came from. But other than that, we just hit 2.5 hours. But it's always such a pleasure to talk movies with you, buddy. But where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a great conversation. You can find me on Letterboxd at Parker_Paget, I think, and follow us along there. Of course, the LetterBros official Letterboxd as well. So
we'll be posting our ratings, like, combined from what we get from the episode, and then we'll be posting each other's ratings as well on our Instagram.
Yeah, follow us there.
Yes, we'll be posting our reels. It's also where we post our ratings, as well as on the actual Letterboxd app. There's a TikTok account open up, so that'll probably just be like reels that we've already done, or maybe some original content, or maybe some mini reviews down the line of like movies that currently come out. But we'll dive into that later. And as always, you can find me on Letterboxd at ETZIO911. I'm posting there all the time. I'm at the movies more than I am at my own house. So, but other than that, thank you for watching. Oh, make sure to rate us 5 stars and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, and go follow us on YouTube. Watch the video version. There's little things that show up in the...
Yeah, you do a great job putting these episodes together. So I do also just want to personally thank you for the work that you're putting in on the post-production side of things.
Thanks. You too, man. You've been making some pretty sick reels, dog. But until then, thank you for watching. What's that?
Sorry, we make a good team.
We make a good team. Good job. Here, oh shit, high five. That.
Whatever.
God damn it.
Maybe don't watch the YouTube.
Maybe don't if you want to see some 2 awkward fucking guys. But until then, thank you for watching, and we will see you at the movie.